they run. You're using state surveillance. You're using military-grade equipment on your own citizens who are protesting poor governance peacefully. Because for the most part, the protests have been peaceful. There have been a few cases of vandalism, but the most worrying is the political mobilization of militia. The last time we saw that in this country was in the 1990s. And unfortunately, Ruto, as a student of Moi, Ruto, as a former ICC indictee, has disappointed Kenyans and gone back to type. He is exemplifying the worst that people feared of him, instead of rising to the occasion based on the campaign he did. So we are in a revolution, and the Gen Z are fighting for us. The question is actually, how do we turn this revolution into permanent transformation so that we can deal with this stranglehold we have of a state that uses the security apparatus to muzzle opposition, to muzzle genuine voice, and this has held back our development. Kenya would be very far. We are being overtaken economically by our neighbors because of the corruption, this kleptocracy, the relationship between the politics and the economy. And this is what the Gen Z are seeking to undo. They don't want to have conclaves.
Whatever.
Conclaves, I don't know what those are, to discuss constitutional amendments, another BBI or an ADOC. They want action. The Maraga report, and I'll end with this, the Maraga report, which was a review of the security sector, looking at the NPS and how to strengthen it, really showed that there's underfunding of police. At the same time, there's a lot of spending on military-grade equipment to muzzle the public. So you have police not well housed, not well remunerated, not well catered for. Parts of the country aren't even policed. Money is instead being spent to suppress. The report primarily focused on leadership and said the kind of appointments, the way they are made, the people who are being put in positions of authority in the police is undermining the ability of the police to serve its people. And he said, we need a negotiated settlement so that we can deal with those who are holding key positions in the security sector who have failed, pointing at DPP, pointing at DCI, pointing even at the NPS, so that those people can step aside. They have blood on their hands. You cannot negotiate or dialogue with people who have blood on their hands. They first step aside. So the first to quell this, because I think there's a recognition we need a dialogue process of some sort. But we don't want to go back to these big jamborees where politicians take over and come and talk about constitutional amendment. That's not our problem. Our problem is a failure of political leadership, a failure of political accountability, a lack of political will. First demonstration, remove those people who have violated the Constitution and have killed innocent Kenyans, exercising Article 7, Article 40, Article 30, exercising their constitutional rights so that we can see some goodwill. The question becomes, how do we get there?
Bonapogisho, just in line with what Unjuri is talking about, you earlier talked about the trust deficit. In one of the dailies today, they actually took a poll, which was just a sample size of 915 randomly selected geopoll users aged 18 and above. 71% say their voice is not being heard by the government. 63% say they have minimal confidence in government. That's how much they distrust the government. You've served both in cabinet and in the Senate. My question is, in your experience when you were in government, because everything Wanjiru has just raised is this other side of the world, then you have the political leadership, you have people in government, and the statements that Ndu was referring to, a lot of these are not just coming from your local MP. These are actually either ministers in government or senior government officials. In those cabinet meetings or in those government meetings, in your experience, are there normally conversations around the pulse of the country? These are the issues that are going on around the country, and this should be on top of our agenda. We should discuss this. Or is it a question of Government meetings are done, devoid of everything else that's going on around the country. It's just the policies, is what the ministries are doing. In your experience, how has it worked before?
I've been very fortunate to serve in two governments. First of all, I was in Moi's government, and then I was in the Kibaki II government. And I know that it all boils down to leadership style. The leader is the president, and his style determines how the cabinet works. If you are a listening president, you will actually change this country, because every minister, and I keep wondering why presidents should have too many advisors, because every minister is actually an advisor, and you take an oath as a minister, so you say that I will advise the president. And so when you add all these things that are extra costs by hiring people from outside and making it look like we need the expertise, when you appoint permanent secretaries and ministers, you should appoint them in line with what they do and in line with their expertise, so that they can advise you. It's not a random thing that you say, this is my friend, let me bring him here, this is my relative. And I think that's what has happened. What I find in this government is probably that people don't listen to each other. Their advice is not taken, or they are afraid. And you see, by the way, if you don't create a situation in your cabinet where people are free to air their views, people are free to correct even the president, to show you that this was wrong and come and tell you this was wrong. When the president said shoot in the legs, I didn't see anybody in that cabinet or even the advisors who came and say, hey, that's not good. We can shoot our people. They all went quiet. And then others added, actually, later, they said, not even the legs, but shoot to kill.
Right.
Shoot dead. Mm. And the person saying that, by the way, is a chairman in the parliament of not only just intelligence and armed forces, but also foreign affairs, foreign relations in the country. And the reason I say that is because Nelson Koech, for example, should be a seasoned politician by now. But how can he come and act as though he's a co-president? The president has said, shoot in the legs. He comes and says, no, President, we shoot to die. We shoot them to die. He's overriding what the president has said. Who gives him that authority? Because, first of all, he's not in the executive. He's supposed to represent people. And those people who are going to be shot in the leg or shot dead are his constituents. And what is that a politician who wants to be here for a long time? Even for His Excellency the President, and with all respect, when everybody is shot in the legs, some die, some will limp, okay? What kind of country is this that we're looking for? And so these are the things that now we use opportunities like this to give our advice free of charge. That let's come back to reality. I have friends in politics. Sometimes you say silly things. You say things that you regret later. And I have friends who tell me sometimes it's good. It's okay not to say. Sometimes it's okay not to speak. Sometimes it's okay not to say those things. And we've said that to me so many times that they don't even have to complete the words. So they only tell me sometimes, and when I hear sometimes, I know what that means. And so I need to say this to the leadership of this country. Sometimes you really don't have to say these things. You don't have to speak. If, for example, now, how do you make a president retract on what he has said? It's very difficult. And if he had a friend like the ones I have, he would have said to him, sometimes when you are completely angry, you don't have to say these things. You don't have to speak. And if they were to say to my friend Nelson Koech, I would have said, sometimes you don't have to speak. Because look at this nation. It's full of young people who are so intelligent, so highly educated. They are going somewhere. You think they are children. You think they don't know that meat is cooked. You think they're ignorant. And these are the people who are trying to tell you something and you're not understanding. I'm also a background in communications, and I know that in communication, it's called meaning is created. It's actually creating understanding. And why are we not able to create that understanding with our young people? That, okay, can we listen to you? Is this what you mean? Are these protests supposed to produce something? Where are we going? And so on. So I do suspect that sometimes it's a leadership problem. It's a leadership style. We have been told many times that the president doesn't necessarily listen to his advisors, but now is a time for him to listen. He has to sit and painfully listen to his advice, so that we can move this country forward. Otherwise, if we have a country full of limping people, people who are dead, even as president, you might not be there. I mean, you might actually have nobody to vote. So I was very pleased with one thing, that ODM, which is supposed to be a partner in this government, has now distanced themselves from those pronouncements, and they have said no, not to that one. And by the time we hear even from President Museveni of Uganda saying no, you don't shoot citizens, then you know this has gone out of hand. No president in the world orders that kind of thing in today's world, and no chairman of any committee. And sometimes these people live as though they think, because you are my friend, I can also rule the country for you.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have the mandate to do that. In fact, Nelson Koech should be called out for what he said about the president, and many other people who have said this. So, and my advice, of course, is that we have neglected the biggest chunk of our population, called the Gen Zs and the young people. And this is going to be our problem for a long time. And unless we come back to say, who are these people? They're not just children, because we keep talking about them as children.
Yeah.
They're professionals, and they're armed. They're armed with a tool, this one, a smartphone. And you can see all of them. You know, we used to say there's an underground movement. This one is above ground. It's actually like an air force, you know, because they're up in the air, and they're working. So let's move in that direction and say, how do we tame this situation? Bring these people, include them in our governance, listen to them. Yeah.
And you see, when you talk about, let's look at how even the president came to power. He had some of the catchiest slogans, speaking to the Mwananchi, Sisi Hatupangwingwi. And you see, this was a communication to the young people of this country, who then turned out and gave him the vote. Now, here is a question where the young people have used that slogan to tell him how to Tupanga, Sisi Pia Hatupangwingwi. And these are the issues that we have: accountability, rule of law, constitutionalism. And the president, while taking the oath of office, swear to protect the constitution. Now let's look at some of the issues in the Article 39, freedom of movement, Article 37, freedom to picket. You know, talk about the freedom of the media. Media is being muzzled. We were switched off the other day. And one asks the question, at what point then does the leadership sit to reflect back, and they need to just live by the constitution and respect the rule of law? Because then if we implement the constitution, everything else that falls down, including what is being asked by the young people, by the Gen Zs, it will be easy and just going home, because we respect the law, no?
Yeah, theoretically. But the reality is that we have a political problem in this country, and we've had it for a while. And we have, because even going back to, if we talk about our present democratic kind of stage, we would say that 2007 was a watershed in this country, where because of lack of political accountability, Kriegler said it, that even though the Election Act that we had then was pretty watered down, he said there were sufficient provisions and safeguards that, had those charged with the responsibility abided by this law, we would not have gone into the post-election violence. So he said the problem was the lack of accountability, not the law. We then had Agenda 4. And Agenda 4 was a reset. And when you talk about the second liberation starting in 1992 with reintroduction of multi-party, the Agenda 4 was really the point where we said, okay, we cannot continue as we are. And we had our 4 agenda items, which included the post-election, dealing with the post-election violence, dealing with historical injustice, dealing with land issues, dealing with the Constitution. Now, we then went on to elect political leaders who voted against the constitution and who then muzzled the Agenda 4. Agenda 4 is about historical injustice. It is about lack of political accountability. It's about, public land that is owned by private individuals and who then must use state force to protect themselves. It's really about how do we grow to become a country where everybody feels heard and felt and has opportunity in Kenya. You can't when you're the most unequal country, one of the most unequal countries in the world. So it was really about that reset. But we had some gains. Constitution was enacted, devolution started being implemented, sending money all around. We enacted Chapter 6. We did all of these good things. But the spirit has been undermined because from Uhuru Ruto, and I'll go back to there, you saw then the laws being enacted, whether it's the media legislation, whether, this kind of regressive legislation, looking at computer cyber crimes. Yes, you want to protect this space, but then you implement a law that's so draconian, has so many gaps that it can be used. Devolution has been undermined. We are seeing a centralization. This fiasco we are seeing with Schiff and Shah is tragic because our health system was decentralized in the 90s. And when we were enacting the new constitution, in fact, the World Bank predicted that the health system in Kenya would collapse because the Council of Governors, then headed by Isaac Ruto when he was still championing the constitution side before he was swallowed by the politics and became an apologist and lost sight. He, leading the Council of Governors, pushed for the full implementation of devolution. And the World Bank says, no, you have to phase it. But the Council of Governors recognized that the national government was resistant, and they pushed, and health did not collapse. Of course, we've had continued industrial strike, but it did not collapse because it was decentralized. Now, under the guise of digitization, we are privatizing health, we are centralizing health, and actually implementing models that aren't sustainable when you're talking about a population as big as and as diverse as ours. So these are some of those fundamental questions, policy questions that need debate, need evidence monitoring, need a listening president. So the point I was coming to is what the Gen Z are talking about is accountability. And I believe the question on the table is political accountability. How do we get that? The NCCK did some very interesting scenarios last year when the revolt came up. And this revolt caught everyone off guard. Of course, the administration is trying to use side kind of, saying this is an ethnic issue. It's not. We are all Kikuyus, yes, as the Gen Z have told us. This is not a tribal ethnic thing. But it is a political governance thing. So last year, when we were all surprised by our young people's courage when they spoke, I would say civil society leaders did programs, would say the religious leaders did pacification, peace, whatever. The Gen Z came out and said, we want change. And the 4 scenarios that NCCK gave, because they said we are at a point where the majority have rejected the political leadership. They've said things must change, and they're out on the street. They said William Ruto had the option to listen, at that time acquiesce and go, because they were saying Ruto must go. There was the legal /recall option, where legal means could be used. That's a bit problematic. The redemptive option is the one that they emphasized a lot, where William Ruto listens and does 5 things to redeem his presidency. One was dissolve the cabinet. Now this thing of mine. The other one was reorganize parliamentary leadership, including finance, budget. That time the key issue was cost of living. Yes. Now the key concern of Kenyans, there was an Odipo
Odipodev.
Yes.
Odipodev survey that was saying the key concern of Kenyans is extrajudicial killings,
yes.
abductions, and all of that. Then point 3, end abductions. 4, credible selection panel to constitute the IEBC, and then a national economic, recovery program. Then it went on to say there is a wet blanket option where William Ruto uses military and police power to stay in power. And then the 5th option, which could emanate from this, is ethnic clashes begin in some parts of the country because of this situation of chaos. Unfortunately, we are seeing scenario 4 and scenario 5 because the youth have done their part and they are continuing to engage because this is a political contestation. They are holding their side, but the state is responding by not listening and by using force. Scorched earth policy, where when politicians begin to mobilize militia, that's a situation for anarchy. When you use threaten lethal force to citizens, again, what are you saying? So we are in a very dire situation. And the question is, how do we get out of this?
And even as we continue, and I think these are some of the things that come out even in this discourse, because this discourse is happening in many, many different pockets across platforms in the country. But one of the things that then is very clear is that if there is prescriptive discourse that's taking place, that you should do this because of what we have seen, there also has to be an ample playing ground whereby it is accepted. Because everybody is saying so many things. Ruto must go, leadership must change, this is the recommendation. But what if the president actually doesn't see a problem, as he has alluded to several times, Bonapogisho? He really doesn't see what everybody's making noise about. He's even asked the question and said, Munataka niende, how will I go?
He's actually telling parents, you need to sit down with your children.
You guys are the
talk
ones
to your
with the
children.
problem.
And it's not the first time he's addressing parents
Absolutely.
to talk to their children. So
Yeah.
the problem is parents are not talking to their children or addressing important issues with their children.
How do you deal with that? I mean, because he doesn't see that there's an issue. So everybody else is the one who's making noise here. If anything, he's telling you what he's going to do secondary to those issues that are bringing about these problems in the country.
Well, if only the president could realize that trust is waning, that the public trust, if he can only realize that he needs to do something about it, he would then begin to listen. But until and unless he does that, he thinks that it's the noise outside there. That is noise. It's not even a part of the agenda of the country. And so I would rather say that, and I speak a lot about these things about trust and how to restore trust. And one of the things about trust is, if you really have a problem, is to get back to clarity. Can you make it, are these young people clear to you? Do you understand them? The second one is one thing which they don't have. It's called compassion. I mean, if there's no compassion in leadership, you're going to be ruthless to your country. And that element of compassion is followed by an element of character. And when people see the character that's leading them, looks at the people who are leading them, trust will never come back. Will not come back, because they look at the way, the person in charge of internal security, would say things like, shoot them. And so they run away from that and think, where are we? We are not part and parcel of this. And the president needs to bring everybody on board. So the challenge that we have as a country is our situation. Can we be consistent? Can we at least be consistent what we say we do? And who is the person? When the spokesperson of the government says one thing and somebody comes and changes that immediately, can we say that there is no order in the house? Is that what it is? Are we being led by people who are not orderly? They are not orderly. So I believe when the chips are down, we're going to have to count the losses of this government. And we're going to say, where did we go wrong? And why was everybody quiet? Why was nobody, except the young people, who else was speaking. And so when the Gen Zs come with their agenda and they say we want accountability, the president says, yes, I'm going to do that. He does it for a few days, and then it's forgotten. They're back to square one. Some of the appointments that have been made, you cannot even explain. Were they made for the purpose of restoring order, for restoring trust, or they were just made because of some kind of satisfaction for the moment? And so I do agree with you that we are in a situation in our country, a country that we love so much, a country that I call a special country, that we need now to realize that we have to protect our country. We have to come out and say, please, this is the way we want to be led. Lead us this way. Because if we go this path, we will have no country. And the people who have money now, which is a lot of young people and people who are in government now have a lot of money. And so billionaires and millionaires have come out within a short time. And they become blinded. They've developed blind spots. They cannot see the rest of us. They cannot see who is suffering. They cannot see who is, who's weeping. They cannot see,
Or can they? And I think this probably may be a deeper question. That is it possible that, we want to philosophize this quite some, and we want to say, well, that maybe they do see, but because of the fact that that is not the priority, that is not the original intention, because I'm not able to connect myself with somebody who sees the suffering of people and doesn't do anything about it, unless their agenda was never to do anything about it from the very beginning. So here we are saying that you should do something about it because it is the right thing to do. But what if that was not my agenda?
The whole foundation of constitutional democracy, constitutional government, rule of law, is to check state power. That's the whole foundation, because it recognizes that unchecked state power leads to violation. So the question we've been struggling with as a country is, how do we check excessive state power? We have a constitution that sought to remove some of those presidential powers and disperse them to parliament, to the oversight institutions, but we have seen it was not enough, because despite the constitution, despite having constitutional protection, we have a DPP who withdrew corruption cases under the direction, we assume, of the president who had now ascended. And you then say this DPP who withdrew cases that he said were coerced needed to leave office, either because he was coerced or has now been coerced.
Because in the very beginning, you gave a full watertight charge sheet to the court and said, we found evidence, and because of this, we must proceed to trial.
So one way or the other, either you are inept or you are complicit. Either way, you don't deserve that office, let alone the more powerful office of the DCI, of the NIS. Because how do you then take this person of this character and interest to the NIS, who is supposed to be giving intelligence to the government? And, we've then seen what is coming out of that. Then we've talked about the appointments in the police being politically, leading to partisanship. So the problem we have is the president and the people, I always say William Ruto, because I think he's really not risen to presidency due to just the conduct of his administration. But William Ruto and the people around him are asking the wrong question, because the question they're asking is, how do we hold on to power? They should be asking, what is good for the country when the majority of the population have said you must go? That takes humility, as Mr. Pogisho here is saying. Do we have leaders of humility, of sobriety, who can recognize this isn't really about you? This is about a country that needs fundamental reforms, and you're not up to the task. So one, they need that clarity. We also need to recognize there has not been justice for the victims. And this is I think that of the many violations and failures of Nelson Koech, as the chair of defense, has been really ignoring the plight of the victims and becoming a government apologist, as Pogisho has said here. Instead of operating like as the oversight arm, you become an apologist. You're the one who is even more rabid than the state itself. He needs to be recalled and recalled immediately and dealt with by Kenyans, which comes back actually to this point of Kenyans having this habit of electing people without paying attention to what they do. But maybe the last point I want to make, what do you do when a president will not listen? The colonialists would not listen. Kenya is a country that's built on a history of non-violent protest. And in the case of the Mau Mau, that included armed insurgency. But there was still a lot of non-violent protest. Harithuku, when he was arrested in 1922, was one of the first recorded. And in fact, the colonialists killed 150 Kenyans because of the protest. And it was led by a woman who stripped and said, "You men, give me your trousers because you're not men enough." They have arrested our leaders. So 1922. 1937, there was a labor protest that actually formed the foundation of the labor movement. Unfortunately, the labor movement has then really been co-opted and has lost that energy. Then, of course, you get into the agitation for independence, and then into the 70s and 1992. So when political power does not listen, the people must make it listen.
But Wanjiru,
and this is what our Gen Z are doing. Question is, what more needs to be done to augment the energies of the Gen Zs or the youth and turn that into the protest agenda?
Well, they're not listening, but the broad-based partner, Raila Odinga, has said...
The
has
previous
proposed,
opposition.
Yes.
Would be.
has proposed and seems to be pushing for an intergenerational conclave.
Yeah, I thought we already said we don't understand what a conclave is.
Well, it's just coming to the table to dialogue.
Number two, I think the legitimacy of Raila Odinga is so, watered down because this is the opposition that needed to have stood with Kenyans and instead got into bed with the political leadership. Yes, there is need for a dialogue, but the proposals that Raila Odinga made seem to have been cut and paste from the BBI discussion. So you even wonder, don't you have new people? Maybe employ some of the Gen Zs to advise Raila Odinga.
So if it's a question of dialogue,
wrongly placed.
Who should call this dialogue?
Yeah, first of all, the whole issue of the person who should call this dialogue is a question, because if for example, the young people have said, you can't talk to us.
They don't want to have this conversation.
What conversation are you saying they have?
Yes.
Haven't they put their demands, and their demands are implement the Constitution?
Exactly.
Then that is like a student sitting in class, being told, revise, there is a test. Then you say, let us negotiate. First, do the test. When you get the results and you struggle, then you sit and talk.
It's a very difficult time to lead this country for any leader. But the leader must realize that the opportunities are there to change this country for good. Because right now, everybody's giving you the information you need. They're very fortunate that the young people are using whatever knowledge they have to show the president, say, this is what we need. This is what the country needs. Please do this. And you should take that as an advantage that you have people like that who are actually giving you good advice and wanting to show you that this is what we want. This is the Kenya you want. And so this is a time for President William Ruto to say, I will be the president who will transform this country based on the needs of my people and how we want this country to be. Bring the change that you promised that you would bring. This is the time for him to do that. Unfortunately, I don't think he has enough support from the people around him to move this country to the direction of the young people. Because if the young people themselves cannot be heard, cannot be listened to, they have the correct... These guys have already formulated what I would say a governance structure in their minds and also in their documentation. They've done it. Here it is. And instead of embracing them, you're actually punishing them for it. And I think that the situation is, I want the president to understand. I do understand it's not an easy time to rule over people who are so highly educated but jobless, to continue to talk to people whose means, are not guaranteed. And what are you going to do? Because the president came out. You know, when the president says, Mimi Nasumbuliwa, and yet you had presidents before me, but nobody promised the things you promised. You know, those guys had their own share of problems, but they only got the amount equivalent to what they promised.
Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Exactly.
Right? And a lot of the things that we're hearing, one would imagine that they're just being said in passing, but it's very difficult for you to say things in passing if there's no element of really feeling that from inside. And some of the proclamations that we've heard, and repeatedly so, by folks who should be in a position of actually this kind of leadership whereby the people, number one, are protected, then we want to ask ourselves the question. Previously, when we heard things like this, bodies like the NCIC would have jumped all over it and said, okay, what can we do about some of these things? But we don't see that happening. Are we hurtling quickly, or are we already in the throes of whereby you say we're in a place where very little then can be salvaged?
We can never say that because it's our country. And I think there are two forces, you know, if you're to kind of simplify this. There's the force that is progressive, trying to move us towards a new Kenya. Then there are the forces that are trying to hold on to the status quo. And this tension is the one that we are seeing. Unfortunately, like I said, and going back to these very good NCCK scenarios, William Ruto still has the option to be the redemptive leader, as Pogisho is saying, to read the time and say, I will put the interest of the country first, and I will take actions to begin to rebuild the trust. What would those actions be? And he's already missed so many and is digging himself deeper in a hole. This is David D's favorite slogan. If you're in a hole, stop digging. These people have dug, they're about to come out the other end. When he dissolved the cabinet, he had an opportunity. Because he dissolved the cabinet based on, presumably, that these people lacked legitimacy, had failed in some way. He needed then a proper, that would have been the basis of consultation. Had he then invited Gen Z to say, let us have a discussion about how I reconstitute, then he would have begun having a dialogue. But what did he do? He said, let us meet and talk. He dissolved, let us meet and talk. Gen Z refused to talk because that conversation was not framed. He then reappointed the same people. So now that we are here, not only does he have a cabinet that is carrying a lot of baggage, he now has also in the security sector people who have lost the confidence of Kenyans. So again, if there's a possibility of humility and this discernment, because discernment is God-given and it's lacking in our in our top leadership. If there's that opportunity, start with a clear action that you are breaking from failed leadership. Let us put leadership, integrity, center stage, not to talk, to act.
So are we at a point where we say, because of statements that have been made, we can excuse what is happening? Because listen to what the Interior Minister said, what Koech has said, what the President himself said, and say, you know what, these were just roadside statements. Or is this the position of government? Pogisho, you've served that.
Sorry about that. I tell you what, there's nothing from a president that's called roadside pronouncement, or from a minister. And I have said this day and age, whatever you say is international news. You can say it in your bedroom, it will be picked somehow, and it will become news international. Now, the whole world is discussing the shoot to kill of our country. I want to say, bring back compassion to leadership. Bring back compassion. These are human beings, these are Kenyans. Let's not deal with them as though they were people, strangers from another planet. These are your own people. Bring back compassion to leadership. Don't shoot anybody. treat people like they were your sons and daughters, your brothers and sisters, and let's not talk that language. In fact, by the way, I come from West Pokot, and now something strange has happened in West Pokot. Cannibalism has been found there. You heard about people now eating people. Is that desperation? Or is it some kind of weird things which have come into the country? So the question of let's meet on a conclave is the same as saying let's pray for our country. And even prayer need to be directed faithfully and honestly.
In one direction.
Do we trust each other in this particular manner? When you say let's pray for our country, do you tell me how do we pray? We must then agree. How are we going to pray?
Good questions. Good discourse. Good necessary, I think, to put these things out in the open. We will not be the proverbial ostrich. We will talk about these things as necessarily as we must. Samuel Pagishio and Wajiro Gekonyo, thank you for being here with us this morning, starting off this week with this conversation. Necessary to have more.
Thank you.
Asante Sana, good morning at 8:02.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start